Okay, so the stratification by month, the code there, which is given to you for those who paid today, is right here, and that is going to be the codes that you can actually type in, or you can just copy and paste it. And I'd suggest copying and pasting it. It took a little while to type up, but what this does is it gives you an ability to calculate the stratification into any data set. So the only field that you really need is that VIH account that you see there. And with that VIH account listed, or account amount, excuse me, you're able to then calculate a stratification range for the entire data set. So now moving on, let me just taking a look. What we're then going to do is stratify data to a file for annual comparisons. And that's something where we're first going to do the stratification, and then we're going to do another type of calculated field that takes the results of that stratification and builds a bit of I guess a stratify range again. But again, the difference here is on this first one, this one is based on the actual data in the file, the raw data in the file. This one is based on the actual stratification that you calculate using ACL. So we'll talk through both of those for you to take a look at, and then we'll pause for another break. And again, if you have any questions along the way, just let us know. So again, just to make this easier on everyone, I'm just going to close that table here and close that there. Sure. What we have here are a couple of tables that we can run this on. I'm just trying to think here what's probably the best. I think the ACL Benford's is probably the best, but let me just take a look at how I set this up in my script. So taking a look at the actual script here, the Stratify all records file, this is actually using my Benford's Law table again. So, okay, so the script is down below here, and it's called Strata for a file. And what we're doing here is we're just kind of taking that ACL Benford's file, again, you could change it to whatever you'd like, and that amount field, again, change it to whatever you'd like. We're calculating a Stratify range, which is this calculated field, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then we extract the fields from that file to a new one called Stratify All Recs. And the reason I do this, and we talked about this before, is I want to solidify that calculated field here into an actual file. And also, I really don't want to keep anything hanging out there in my original data file. So this is a way of kind of taking the original data file and converting it into more of a stratified data file, and then being able to work with that. Okay, so let's talk through. I'm going to get rid of what ACL now has is word wrap in the scripting, but I'm just going to get rid of that for a second, and I think we'll be able to read this. So, okay, what you want to do whenever you create a computed field in ACL, what you want to do is put a couple of carriage returns. So notice there's a carriage return here, there's another carriage return there. So there's two carriage returns in between the stratify range and the start of the next, I guess the condition that you have down below. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at that amount field, again that variable with the percentage marks was set up here as a variable. That variable, when the amount is less than, I think that's 10 million, we're going to put under 10 million in a field. When it's greater than negative 10 million and less than a negative 5 million, we put that in, and et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of walks through all of these conditions. Now, as ACL goes through these conditions, if it finds one that works, it stops. If it does not find anything, it then puts in blank. So I guess if you have some bad data in there, I mean everything should fall mathematically into one of these sections. But if it doesn't, you can it just kind of puts up that zero or blanks at the end. Then it's going to extract all the fields to a new file. So let's kind of now work with this. Let me go back to here. I'm going to strata for a file. I'm going to run that. And okay, I have my original table, nothing changed, just like we talked about, but the Stratify All Recs is now developed. And notice here that Stratify range 100 to 499. Let me just change the font here. Maybe you can read this a little bit better. Okay. So right now we now have the 100 to 499 is 197, right? So all of this seems to work really nicely, and that Stratify range is now placed right into ACL for our analysis. Notice too, I put in here in that range, 10, 11, 12. Let me just try to sort this ascending downwards. Again, it should be sorted in because I put the 04, 05, 06, everything should sort properly. And again, that's kind of nice. So that's there. Now that I have that, let's say I wanted to take a look at the Stratify range by time frame. One of the things that I could do, you can do a variety of things at this point. You could summarize on the Stratify range and supplier, the Stratify range and enterer, and you then get an enter Stratify report, based on that. This is like a quick way to do this without even using the Stratify command. But what I really like to do, and I'm just going to go into my table layout and take a look at my entered date. Notice I have that date function there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to check a couple of things here. Bear with me one second. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to go into my table layout, and I am going to redefine or better, split this data. So a couple of ways I can do that is I can add a new expression, and I can say, let's just put entered year. And what I'll do is I'll use the date function, which will convert the enter date to a character formatted date. And in the, let's kind of do that. I know that when it does that, it's going to, let's take a look at that actually. Let's see how does that result when you do that. So let's close all this out and then go into our enter date column here and bring over the entered year column. Notice we have 7/14/2008 listed as the date function. The reason I know that that's how it's going to be listed was my options of the date options of ACL were set to month, day, and year, and therefore that's how it's set up. Because I know that, because I have that in my mind, I can now take that entered year field and say, well, that's not really the entered year. It really was the entire, data. I can actually do a split function, and I can say, let's split it at the, slash mark, and we're going to split it with the third item being listed out. And it's probably just good enough at this point. I could substring it if I wanted to, but I think that's okay. So let's close that. So now, take a look. Now we have the entered year as a field that we can now work off of. Now, if I want to get a little crazy, I can, instead of changing it to year, I can call it month year. And I can then copy this. I can add a little, maybe dash mark in between, plus, and I can then say I want the kind of what is in the first position of that split, which would be the month, and then what is in the third position of the split, which is the year. You can kind of save that. Creates a pretty large computed field, but let's take a look at how that looks. Let's see. So, let's see, I'm going to add that entered month year field in now. And it looks pretty good. It's something where I think it's workable for today. We might be able to all trim it and substring it and make it look a little bit better. But yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so why did I do that? What I now want to do is create a crosstab report. And the crosstab report I find is kind of cool when you do it on the entered month and year. You could just put the count in there. You could put the amount. I like to use the count because I think it's more interesting. We can then stratify, select that stratify range, which we had from before. And let's put this to a new file called, cross strata month year. Just take a second or two. Yeah, it wasn't that long. And now what I have is the count by month and year of all of these strata. So that was a kind of an interesting way to take a look at this. And while it's a little bit beyond our time today and what we should be focusing on, if you put this into Excel, this can be a really nice graph. And what I find interesting is how the data ramped up. Like, I wonder if we didn't have a full month in 2008 because the numbers here look quite low. But then as you get into 2008 February, you notice a few items showing up. And actually the data is very consistent as you go across year after year, but there are some drops and additions in certain months. And I do find that even though you can eyeball this stuff and maybe find it, I find by graphing this stuff and putting every one of these into a bit of a line graph, the strata here, which again it's sorted nicely from low to high because of that 04 to 15 that's listed there. You're able to very, very quickly identify where there are months and years where there are data points or transactions that are just out of line in relation to previous years. Okay, so let me kind of continue on with another script that I've written for you that kind of takes that strata for a file concept and goes one step further, but this time it's a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're actually going to stratify to a table in ACL, and that stratified to a table, I almost want to break the script at this point just so that you can kind of see it. Let me just maybe I'll do that, and then I'll define that field. And I don't even know if we need that stratify order, but we'll keep that in there, and we'll break it at this point of the script. So let me just show you kind of what's happening here. Now that you kind of get the concept of building this. Okay, so when I do a stratify to a file, and that's where we go stratify, and in the output you actually select an ACL table. The stratify command, when it creates a stratify function, it's kind of odd. It creates a field called whatever you had in your data. So in the Benford's data, we had a field called amount. So now in that stratification file, which I'm embarrassed to say I forget which one it was called here, I guess sum in the last 12 months, is that it? Yep. So here is the stratification. Now what it does here is it actually puts in the lowest amount as the limit, or excuse me, the highest amount as the limit of that value. So in this case 5 million, notice here 5 million and above or below that a point. This one, it's easier looking at the 100. The 100 being 0 to 99 is a positive, the 500 being 100 to 499, the 1000 being 500 to 99999. The negatives are a little harder to explain it that way, but it is working under the same premise that 5 million is the highest amount. Negative 5 million is just working kind of backwards, so it's a little weird. Anyway, with that said, that is the amount field, which then drives a stratify range calculation that I've put into the script. And just remembering the two different slides that we had. The one slide kind of talked about creating stratification where you work off of the amount fields, and then you had this other stratification calculation that worked off of that amount field. So I'm actually looking at the amount field and saying, is it negative 10 million? Then it's stuff that's under negative 10 million. Is it negative 5 million? Then it's stuff that is between negative 10 million and negative 5 million, and so on and so forth through the stratification. Okay, so let me get rid of, now that you kind of understand what this is doing, I actually am going to run this twice. So I'm going to run it for this year's data and the previous 12 months data, and I'm going to join those two files together. I won't save anything there. Okay, so let's kind of run that now, this year to last year, cross our fingers. Oh, I must have not gotten rid of the break. Sorry about that. I should have saved my changes. There we go. Get rid of that break. And we'll run that again. It's a nice thing about scripting, as much as you tend to build things, you can actually just rerun things very, very quickly, and for the most part get the right result, hopefully, in the next data run like we did here. So this is kind of giving you now a variance analysis, and it's combining a lot of the concepts that we've talked about today, but I think some of the main ones that are pertinent for this scripting is this conditional field where, again, you have to have a couple of carriage returns in between, and then you have your calculation and then the order. And then all I'm doing is kind of, once I've calculated those fields, I'm joining these files together so that we can actually create like a variance table and a percentage difference that we've talked about as well in other previous Benford law discussions. So that kind of creates this Stratify analysis that you can then take a look at. So what I like about this is that you can, let me just blow this up a little bit more just so you can see it hopefully a lot better. So if I have the value current year and the value last year, I mean, you could do it on the count as well, but I'm just doing it on the values. You can get a difference percentage here of, what is the difference? 48%, 43, 44%. 12%, but it really does show that some of these categories are really ramping up. I mean, especially in the million to 5 million category, the current 12 months to last 12 months has gone up by about 67%. I mean, that is really remarkable, something to go definitely take a look at. So I really like this report because it does give you an ability to very quickly identify those strata this year to last year that are strange. Now, it's not doing it in a total format, right? It's not just saying by supplier in this case or by account number. It's just doing it on the amounts themselves. So it's a kind of a different way of looking at things and more statistical than anything else. Okay, the other thing that I then do, and I just have to think about my logic here a little bit, but it then calculated how many items were different from a very, very large different perspective. And I'm kind of hoping that million the million to 4 million notice here was also in that. We just talked about the million to 4 million ramping up. So what I then did was I went back to the original file and said, okay, extract anything that's over a certain percentage mark. And I just have to go back to my script to say, well, what did I set as that variable of what is unusual? Unusual is anything that's greater than 15%. Now, if I change that and say, well, that's a little too unrestrictive, let's make it anything greater than, let me make it 40% just to get a few more items in there than normal. I can run this again, right? There's nothing stopping me, but now I'm going to get anything that's over 40% greater in the unlikely. So the unlikely now becomes a lot smaller, goes from 40 to 66, but notice that one here, this was like 67% higher, that is being extracted. And what I like about this is even though I have the variance calculation here, I kind of go to that next step and I go back to the original data and calculate that stratify range for every data point and then join anything here that's over a certain amount back to the original data set and pull out any of those items that are over, say, 67%. So my suggestion to you, a lot here that we're trying to bring across, and a lot of code here that obviously you can kind of work with on your own. But notice all of these stratify range commands being calculated, the joins happening here. I definitely suggest you take a look at this code, but what's also really useful is that all you have to do to use this code is just update these 5 data points up here. What is the data file? What is the amount field you're working on? What's the date field that you're working on this year to last year? What's the last date in the file? And what is an unusual percentage? After that point, you can just sit back and relax and let the script kind of take care of everything else for you.